Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhyolite Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Tangling Jack Ford, and indeed Tangling Jack Ford, over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can reach out to me at the studio by dropping me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. And we're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Did I mention you can find us on Facebook? You can find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound. Anyway, so hopefully see you there. So this week we're going to be chatting to Larch Gallagher, who is a cover designer. She is actually the cover designer I work with on my books. But before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhyolite Zone and we're going to get the latest instalment of Insomniac, which is a novella by myself, Dane Cobain.
I need help, Kate said. I hate to ask, but you want to move back in with me? Her mother didn't sound impressed. Kate knew how much she'd looked forward to getting the kids out of the house, but she hoped that things had changed since her father died. She also knew she was a nightmare to live with. Even if she tiptoed around the house, she wouldn't be able to help herself from making a noise at 4 AM when she wanted a cup of tea or when she needed to use the toilet. She always flushed, no matter what the hour. She had to. If she didn't, bad things would happen. Kate begged her mother to take her in, and she could tell that her resolve was beginning to fade, but she knew that it was far from an ideal situation for either of them. Then she did the only thing she had left to do. She started packing her stuff into black bin bags. Week 32, day 1. I've made a decision, Kate's mother said, but I want to talk to you about it in person. Can we meet for lunch somewhere? Let me check my diary, Kate replied. She didn't have to. Yeah, I'm free, but I can't leave the house. Why not? What if the bailiffs come? Her mother sighed, as though she thought her daughter was being a child, but Kate was being practical. If the bailiffs came, she could try to delay them or to head them off, but if she was out of the house, there'd be no one to stop them from letting themselves in and taking her stuff away. If Zeb let them, of course. Kate met her mother at the garden centre. It was her mother's favourite place to talk things over, and Kate was more than happy to risk another confrontation with the carrot cake. Her mother didn't disappoint, and she was already on her third slice by the time that the inevitable discussion began. So, her mother said. She didn't seem her usual, confident self, and that scared Kate more than any apparition ever could. This living situation. What's happening, Kate? The abruptness of the question took her by surprise, and she had to think about it for a moment before she provided an answer. I'm not quite sure, she said. There's something wrong inside me, something that stops me from sleeping and makes me see things. I've been seeing Nana Knight. Nana Knight, her mother repeated. She was clearly sceptical, but she'd also been the only person in the family to be attached to the old dear. She'd made the trip up north to see her once a month like clockwork, at least until she'd popped her clogs and moved on to wherever people move on to. How is the old girl? I don't want to talk about it. Fair enough. An awkward silence descended. Kate picked up another slice of carrot cake, and her mother slurped at her coffee. Okay. Okay? Okay, she repeated. You can move back in with me. But I don't have space for all your stuff, and so you'll have to put it into storage. I can do that. There's more, her mother continued. You're going to have to find a job. This is getting out of hand, Kate. You need to sort your life out. You need to pull yourself together. Yeah, she said. I know. It's funny, she thought. She gets more and more like Nana Knight as the years go by.
Week 34, day 6. The day had finally arrived. Kate had been living in the house like a nervous squatter, barely leaving the place and spending most of her time twitching from behind the curtain. Her bags were packed and she was ready to go. She just wanted to drag out the time a little longer. When the bailiffs arrived, she kept her composure. She was resigned to the fact that she'd be leaving the place, just like she was resigned to the fact that proper sleep was for other people. So when the fateful day arrived, she welcomed them in with a cup of tea and a biscuit. In return, they helped her to carry the black bags full of her worldly possessions out onto the curb. Most of the big stuff was in storage, and she didn't know much else. So when the job was done, she simply called a taxi and asked them to send a big black cab. There was enough room there for all of her belongings, with room to spare for her to slip in beside them. When she was done, she slipped the key through the letterbox and turned her back on the house. She hoped that her mother's house would be better for her and that she'd finally get a good night's sleep. And she hoped that Zeb would stay behind and haunt the new tenant instead of following her. But even as she thought it, she knew it was crazy. When the taxi pulled up outside her mother's house, the driver kept the meter running. Kate's mother wasn't at home. She had a job to do, as she kept on reminding her daughter, and so she had to carry her belongings inside by herself after grabbing the key that she'd stashed beneath a dustbin, just in case of such an eventuality. Zeb trailed along behind her, but he refused to help her with the bags. She felt his eyes boring a hole into the back of her head as she hauled her possessions into her mother's house. That was the latest instalment of Insomniac by myself, Dane Cobain. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. That was the latest instalment of Insomniac by myself, Dane Cobain. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Alice Jane with Pulling Threads.
The pull of a sunset after the tears of a rainy day. All the melodies of laughter in your living room. It strings together all of the moments that call you broken. And there is a piece that connects with every piece. You're still pulling all the threads together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours. Already grown, the sunflower turns to the sun as gently as time melts on. Climbing further, it blossoms in every truth, never questioning the beauty of perfection. You're still pulling all the threads together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours. Letting the light in, letting the light in, letting the light in. It feels like breathing. Letting the light in, letting the light in, letting the light in. It feels like breathing. Letting the light in, letting the light in, letting the light in. Sometimes nature is natural. You're still pulling all the threads together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours.
That was Pulling Threads by Alice Jane. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined now by this week's guest, who is cover designer Larch Gallagher. The first question is one I ask everybody. You might have an interesting answer to this, actually, because you work with book cover design. But I ask everybody, what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
Oh, that's a really tricky question because we read my children a bedtime story every night, like a chapter book. So we've just finished the Bromeliad trilogy with them by Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
But I've also just read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, but I've reread that about 100 times. So the book I last read that I hadn't read before was, what's it called? I should definitely know this. It was called Carrie Soto Is Back.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah. For the Penguin Cover Design Award, one of the things which I was making a cover for to kind of enter for that was by the same author called Daisy and the Six. Daisy Jones.
Yeah, Daisy Jones and the Six.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read that one, but I haven't read her latest one. But it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, but also you mentioning And Then There Were None. I mean, this will be long gone by the time people listen to this, but I'm going to see a performance of And Then There Were None at the Wickham Swan tomorrow. So I don't know what to expect. I've seen some Agatha Christie plays before, but obviously And Then There Were None starting as a novel rather than a play, so I don't know what the adaptation is going to be like, but it'll be interesting to check that out.
Have you read that one before? Do you know who did it, or are you going in
I
completely
do,
blind?
yeah. It's one of those where because with the thing with that I have with mysteries is that I often like, I mean, I love reading mysteries, but I'm quite happy to reread them as well. And I often like I
Yeah.
don't really remember who did it because I'm not one of those readers who tries to figure it out as they go along. So I'm more there for kind of the I guess the story, and I let it kind of wash over me and discover things normally as not necessarily the detective, but their sidekick normally is they get things explained to them, you know. But the
You're
thing with
essentially their
and then there
sidekick.
were none is and then there were none is one of those where the person who did it is so I guess so iconic that it's hard to forget that one. So
Yeah. Yeah, with
I'm
Agatha
going with my
Christie.
girlfriend and she doesn't know.
I love them. I normally kind of leave it a while and then I can't quite remember who did it. But a few of them, you're not going to forget who did it because you say the name and you immediately know. But I feel like you can still reread them pretty well just because, yeah, that's not what you're reading for. It's for the coziness and for the characters and for watching it all build up and unfold. And if you don't know who did it, it's great. But if you do, I think it's still great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and obviously I read it from like a writing point of view as well. So quite often it's a different experience. The first time you don't know who did it, the second time going in knowing who did it, it's a completely different read, especially as an author, because you're starting to look at all the little breadcrumbs and all the misdirection, and
Yeah, you can
it's so
see how
it's
it's
just
all
kind of an
kind of
interesting
layered
way.
up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. So I want to chat to you obviously about book covers today. So I wondered if you could like let me know how long have you been working on book covers and how did you get your start?
So I started working at a little publishing company in 2016, and I was there for a year, but it was so small. I wasn't in design, I was in production. So I was kind of
Mm.
copy editing the books, and I was writing the blurbs, and I was talking to the authors, and I was getting it sent to design and getting it all ready for print. But the design team were literally behind me, and it was two people. So we all chatted a lot. And the head designer knew that I was kind of interested in art and in doing things. So he taught me how to make book cover designs. And I kind of went from there. My friend in production also did this. So we used to have competitions when a new book came in, and we were like, that sounds interesting. We'd each have a go kind of in our spare time making a book cover for it and send them both to the author and be like, who's are they going to pick?
Yeah.
Um, so we were both starting out and very basic, but it was really cool kind of making something and knowing this is actually going to be a book cover, even though you're just starting out.
Yeah.
Then from there, I kind of freelanced around other jobs for a long time. And then after my first child was born, I was going to go back to working in schools, which I've been doing. And I was like, actually, I'm going to try freelancing a bit more and kind of seeing if I can make this into something.
Mhm.
And that was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose as well with again with having children, I mean I guess that's one of the advantages of freelancing for you is that you can fit it around motherhood as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I only do 3 half days right now. So when my kids are kind of more in preschool and more in school, I can build it up if it's working, or I can find a proper job that pays me more money. But
Yeah.
no, it's really cool having the freedom to spend so much time with them and still get to work and kind of choose my hours and choose my clients. It's kind of awesome.
Cool. And I actually know the answer to this one, but the people at home won't. So is it just book covers that you do, or do you work on other things as well?
So I kind of started out just doing book covers and then I sort of branched out. So now I do a bit of illustration work. I do some layouts as well. I'm laying out a complicated political book right now, which is something I've never done. And it's all trying to figure it out as I go and a lot of problem solving, but it's really cool finding the answers to everything and making it all neat and tidy.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. And do you do any other forms of art in your spare time? I say spare time as though, as a mother you have spare time, but when you do get a moment to yourself, do you practice any other kind of forms of art?
I mean, right now I'm knitting a mermaid tail for my daughter's Barbie because we got it from a charity shop and it has no mermaid tail and it's Ariel. So I promised her I would knit one, and it turns out I don't know how to knit a mermaid tail. So there's a lot of learning going on there. And I don't know if this counts as art, but every other week I volunteer doing a rhyme time for toddlers at the library. So I'm singing lots of nursery rhymes and stuff, but I am tone deaf and my children run off constantly or just hunker down and read books. So it's a bit of a shambles, but it's fun.
Yeah. What's your favorite nursery rhyme?
Oh man. I do one which I hadn't heard before. My friend set me up into it, where the child is a pancake. So you flip them up in the air and you shake them to shake sugar on them, and you squeeze them to squeeze lemon, and at the end you eat them and they all giggle, and that's my favorite one.
Awesome.
You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with book cover designer Larch Gallagher, and this is Humans Can't Reboot with Don't Cry Out.
Like a waterfall falling down.
That was Don't Cry Out by Humans Can't Reboot. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be rejoined in conversation now by this week's guest, who is book cover designer Larch Gallagher.
Cool. So, who are some of the authors that you work with on a regular basis?
So me and you have worked together a bunch of times, and JB Hilliard, who you completely set me up with, is someone that I've worked with a lot as well. With my illustrations, I've mainly done them for this really lovely set of grandparents who every year will write a book for their grandchildren, and I illustrate them, and I get to kind of see the kids growing up through the years, which is really cute.
Awesome.
And I've got a few people who I've done kind of trilogies for, which have then turned into double trilogies. So it's like the 6th book cover we're working on now. But a lot of people, I kind of see them once, and then unless they write more books, I don't really see them again, which is...
Yeah, well, because it sort of struck me as well, obviously I don't do cover design, but I write, I do some ghostwriting, I do editing here and there. And book covers, it's one of those things where it's a very important part of the process, but it's not necessarily like a long-term part. You know what I mean? It's something that kind of comes along, you're getting ready for release, and it's like, right, we'll work on it. Maybe you'll be there for a couple of weeks going backwards and forwards, and then it's done. And obviously when you're working as a cover designer, this like with me as a client, you've got to wait for me to write and get my next book edited and everything before I can come along and say I need another cover. So I suppose you have to be quite patient with repeat clients.
Yeah, that's the thing with repeat people. I'll see them kind of once a year or once every couple years, except JV Hilliard, who is on fire writing. I feel like I've done about 5 covers for him already this year. Don't know how
I
he's doing.
can't keep up with him.
But yeah, other people I'll kind of see once, and then maybe I'll see them again. I've got a few people I see every year or so, but yeah, it feels like you kind of dip your toe into their book and then you're done.
Yeah. Cool. And so I saw, I'm not sure whether it was on your website or on social media somewhere, but you were able to reuse one of the concepts that we made back in the day when we were working on the cover for Meat. How often do you get to reuse your concepts? And, what do you do to get the most out of those concepts that don't eventually get used?
So for every custom book cover, I'm making a couple of initial designs, and they're all quite different initial designs because obviously you want to give people a good choice to kind of work out which avenue they want their book cover to go down. So some of the ones I've made, which weren't right for the book, I just love so much. And I always ask the author if I can use them for other stuff. So if I can use it as a pre-made cover and maybe sell it, or if I can use it in other projects, if I can find one that fits it. Obviously, it's finding the right book for that cover then when you have it. So every now and then I'll sell one, or I'll be like, oh, this is perfect for this new project. But it doesn't happen all the time. It's kind of every now and then, but a lot of the time, something that I have been working on, so images that I banked but didn't use, or fonts that I found for something that then I decided not to use, or if I've been working for a while, I'm figuring out how to do something like making the writing go on fire or something, I can often use that for other covers, or I'll have a great idea of how I can use it and get to make some cool things from it. So things are rarely never used again, but they're not always sold on exactly as they were, like your cover was.
Yeah. Awesome. And you mentioned pre-made covers there. What exactly are they? And can you tell us a little bit about the process of making and selling those?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the 2 main ways that I make book covers are custom covers, where someone comes to me and says, this is my book, I need a cover for it. Here's what's going on in the book. Or pre-made covers when I've found an image that's great and I want to use it for something, or I have an idea and I just want to see if I can build something out of it. Or a lot of the time I'm watching TV and I'm like, this is such a beautiful scene on this show. It should be a book cover. So you find kind of images you like, and instead of working to someone else's brief, you get to work to your own brief. So if I'm making something that doesn't work at all, I can throw it out or turn it into a completely different genre, which obviously you can't do with a custom cover because it has a book it has to fit. So I'll make a cover and it's not really for anything, or it's for something and it turned out that it didn't really work for that. And then there's a few websites where you can put it up and say, here's a pre-made cover, it would fit this genre. Here's some keywords that suit this cover. And then people can kind of go and find them and say, this is perfect for my book. Or, oh, I want to write a book about this now I've seen the cover. And they'll kind of come along and buy it. So I have a couple that way. And it does kind of bring in more authors sometimes as well. But it's also just really fun getting to do whatever I want for a while.
Yeah, well, I have an author friend who does kind of exactly as you were saying. She's a like an inveterate hoarder of pre-made covers, where she will see a cover and she'll be inspired by it, and she'll buy this cover and then she'll go off and write something for the cover rather than getting the cover made for something that's being written, which I think is quite
Cool.
interesting. Um, but also, I wondered, do you think there are are there certain genres that pre-made covers work better for? You know, are they more popular for like romance or fantasy or horror or anything like that?
I think romance would definitely be a popular one because a lot of those covers look the same. And on romance covers, you're going to have a couple often, but they don't have to look exactly like the people in your book. Or the people in
Mm,
your book can have quite a generic description, not too much detail, just beautiful with brown hair. And then so many of the romance covers are going to fit. So romance covers are probably quite an easy one to make a pre-made or find a pre-made for. But I
yeah.
think fantasy ones can work as well because fantasy has a very specific feel. So it's easy to make a cover for fantasy. And then you can say, well, this one's about magic in the snow, and this one's about dragon riders. And there's going to be books about dragon riders or about magicians in the snow. So I think that's
Yeah.
another good one.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned a second ago as well about like how it can be a great way to bring in a potential new client. And this is what we see quite often, or at least I see quite often again amongst my author friends. They'll go off and get a pre-made cover for their first book, but it's the first book in a trilogy or a series or whatever. And so then they need, when it comes to book two, it's like, well, I need a cover that fits, that goes with this first cover. And that's when they can potentially come to you and say, I bought one of your pre-mades. It was great. I now need a custom cover for book two in the series that, fits this theme and, so that when they're sat next to each other on a shelf, they feel
Wow.
like part of the same series.
Yeah, absolutely. And that has happened a couple times. Although once it happened, I sold a cover and they were like, okay, let's work on the second cover. And in the meantime, their book got picked up by a publisher. So obviously
Mm,
the publisher then took over the whole series and redesigned all the covers. And the new covers were beautiful. I don't blame them. But I was like, rats.
yeah. I know. Well, I wanted to ask you as well, and this is, I suppose, a wider question, but they have that saying of "Don't judge a book by its cover." Do you think we should judge books by their cover? And I'm assuming you're going to say yes, because otherwise, why would people hire you, right?
I mean, I think you have to judge a book by its cover, at least to some extent, because the cover is meant to be telling you what the book's about. If you have a blank cover, you're going to have no idea what's in that book. Whereas covers are kind of leading you to what the book's about. So if you see a cover that's interesting, oh, this book might be interesting for me. So I think you've got to judge a book by its cover to some extent. But at the same time, I have read books with terrible covers and they're amazing books still. So I guess don't judge it too much by that, but I think it needs to have a good cover or at least a cover that tells you what it's about.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the idea of fantasy again, normally you can look at a fantasy book and you'll know it's a fantasy book. You can look at a
Yeah.
romance book and know it's a romance book. And there are usually trends in the industry as well. So let's say thrillers, they'll generally have the same kind of look and feel. And then, maybe 5, 10 years later, the industry moves on. And I think that's actually where, again, going back to the terrible covers, I find there are two reasons why covers are terrible. One is that it's just a really old cover, and like
Yeah.
just this publishing standards have moved on, and they've you know in the 60s when it was published, they just used a painting or whatever, and it was fine then,
Oh,
but looks
yeah.
weird now. Or the other one is that they're self-published and the authors tried to do it themselves. And I guess this again comes back to why people should hire you. But with a self-published author, like myself, who's maybe working with a budget, they only have so much money, they need to cover their editing and marketing and all of these other
Yeah.
costs. What is it that that is so important about the cover that makes it an important investment? Like, why should people get a cover designed rather than trying to do it themselves in Microsoft Paint or whatever?
Well, I think partly the reason is because self-publishing is so big now. There are so many books pouring onto the market every day. And obviously, you want a good book and you need to market it well so it doesn't get lost. But if you look at a book and you see that it's got a self-published cover and the author made it and didn't hire someone, you're going to think, well, they put no effort into this cover, really. They put no money into this cover. So does that kind of say something about the quality of the book? And also, it's just going to get lost amongst all the other books that maybe have been self-published and authors have made the covers as well. And I feel like it makes you feel like if they didn't put the effort in there, maybe it's not going to be so well written, maybe it's not going to be properly edited, and books that aren't properly edited are a pain to read.
Mm.
They're just, you get a chapter in and it's painful. I think hiring a designer to do your cover shows that you're putting in the time, you're putting in the effort, and you're valuing that for your reader as well. So it's kind of showing your reader that you've really, no, you've made something that you're proud of and you want them to enjoy it as well.
Yeah. I suppose it's like it makes me think of like when you're watching cooking shows like MasterChef or whatever, and you know they always talk about the presentation of the dish. There's no point if you make a dish that's delicious but that looks terrible, nobody's going to order it. You know, they're not going to see somebody else eating it and go, "Wow, I want to have whatever they're having."
Like the
And
Halloween
and
green
again,
ketchup. When you
sorry.
bought the green ketchup for Halloween and you were like, this is fun, and you put it on your plate and you don't want to eat it because
Yeah,
green ketchup, you're not really going to eat that.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Cool. And so I wanted to ask you, in terms of your cover design and particularly the custom cover design, let's say that somebody wants to hire you for a cover, let's say for a fantasy novel, and they want you to do a custom cover. They reach out to you. What does the process look like from start to finish?
Okay, so normally I'll start by kind of gathering a bunch of information about the book. So obviously I need the book title and the author name because you've got to put those on the cover. But I also need kind of a brief synopsis about the book. I need information about the main characters, the settings, the themes, so that I know how things look. I'll also always ask for examples of book covers they really like or in a style that fits their book, because book covers can be so varied, even in a genre like fantasy where you kind of have a feel that's quite universal. They might want it illustrated, they might want kind of vector imagery, they might want it very photorealistic, and they might want it kind of dark or moody or bright or shiny or glittery. And it's really helpful to kind of have these bases and say, okay, this is what they like, and this is how their book feels for them. So I'll always do that as well. And if they've got any ideas for what goes on the cover, I'm not always going to use them, but I like hearing their ideas. I like seeing if I can turn that into kind of take the image in their head for their book and turn it into the proper book cover. So I'll get a bunch of information about the book, and then I'll also kind of go and have a look at the books they've suggested and similar books to those and see what's happening in that side of the genre as well, whether there's typography that's used a lot, whether there's images that are used a lot, whether there's color profiles that are used a lot. Because I want you to look at it and say, okay, I understand what this book is, but you also want it to stand apart from them a bit, which is a tricky balance sometimes. So when I've got a bunch of information, then I'll go finding images. So I'll make a few ideas in my head of what this could be and go and track down some images that might work in there and kind of branch off a little bit as well to see if I can pick up anything new there. And I've got a huge bank of images on my computer that I see pretty pictures and download them. So I'll go in there as well. And then I'll make a couple of initial designs. Every now and then I do one initial design. I'm like, this is perfect. I'm just going to send them it. But normally it's kind of somewhere between 1 and 4 designs, something that the author completely wants, and then something completely different in a different style as well. Because I've had people say, I want an illustrated cover, and then they see a photo version and they're like, actually, this is perfect for my book.
Yeah.
So it's good to have something completely off the wall as well, so that just in case they'd never have thought of this, but this is what they want, it's kind of out there. And then I'll send the initial designs over, and from there kind of work with their feedback to make new designs, or hone in on one of those initial designs and work it until it fits the cover properly. And then once we've got a final cover design, then I'll do the spine and the back cover, because you need the final cover before you can do anything else. But it's always kind of the same process, but the timing varies so much. Some authors, it takes a long time, a lot of different initial designs. Some authors, there's a lot of fine details. Some, they'll see initial design and say, this is perfect, we're done.
Yeah.
That's my book cover. And I've worked with them for a week at that point and we're finished. So it really
Awesome.
varies.
Cool. And what are some of your favorite covers that you've worked on?
Oh man. I know we mentioned JV Hilliard before. I really like designing fantasy covers because they're just really fun. So some of the ones I've done with him have definitely been favorites. Recently, we've been doing a trilogy about like a half bone elf, half Medusa. So she starts out as kind of this like fierce warrior woman who's quite human, but like pointy ears and
Mm.
ash gray skin. And then over the book covers, she slowly transforms into like this badass Medusa with snake hair and scales and very reptilian. And that was really fun to do. Because I got to give her all these like this locks of snakes that I just got to build up from scratch. And it took ages finding the scales for her skin because everything looked a bit strange or a bit artificial or just changed the color scheme on her. And then finally I found fish scales and I was like, these are perfect. And it all clicked into place, which was very satisfying. So that was really fun.
Well, I think what's cool about that as well is that you've actually been able to almost use the covers for storytelling, you know, to sort of show the development of a character from, you know, book 1 to book 3, which you don't get to see often. You know, I think it'd be cool to see that done more with series.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed doing that. And it would have been cool to use a slightly different image each time. So they're like turning and swiveling, but I'd have to go out and find a model and take the photos for that. So she's in the same position each time, but I've varied it up and you can see her gradually changing. And hopefully when you read the series or when you put the books next to each other, you'll be able to see kind of the trilogy and kind of almost read it going through by just looking at the covers.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so one question I've got to ask you, what are your thoughts on AI, and do you think it's ever going to pose a threat to your job?
Oh man, I mean, I hope not. um, I think that AI is probably just going to become another tool that people use. So the way that we use stock imagery now, or that we use kind of tools in Photoshop to edit images, I think AI is going to be great for that, for editing images, for creating an image you want, or for authors to tell designers what they're looking for, to say, this is the picture in my mind. I can't draw it, but here's this. Can you go and make something that has a similar feel, that this is what my character looks like in my head? And it would be so good for something like that. But I don't think it's going to replace proper designers and proper artists, because I think it's going to be similar to people making their own covers now. You're going to see it and say, well, that was designed by a computer. If you're not putting the effort in there, or you put the effort into your book. And I also think that if everyone used AI covers, all the covers would look the same and people would just want something different. I think it's gonna, for authors who wouldn't want to pay a designer anyway, who wouldn't want to pay a designer a proper amount, who'd want to pay like a tenner for a cover, they're gonna make their covers that way, and that's okay. But I think for authors who'd want to use a designer, who'd want that human element, that creativity, that understanding of kind of the context of the book and where it's going, and also being able to understand feedback, I don't think it's going to replace designers for authors like that.
Yeah, cool.
But it is interesting, and kind of seeing how it's developed, because you look at AI images from just a couple years ago and you look at them now and it's changed so much.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And the last question is sort of 2 in 1. What's next, and where can people follow you to find out more? And, you know, if they want to get a cover design, how do they reach out to you?
Oh, well, luckily I have a ridiculous name, so I'm so easy to find. I think I'm probably the only Larch Gallagher on social media. I've tried to find others and it's very hard to find me, or to find other people called Larch. But I've also got a website, which is larchgallagher.co.uk, which immediately goes to larchgallagher.weebly.co.uk. So you can also put that in, but it's harder to remember. So I'm very easy to find if you want to find me, and please do. But yeah, definitely while my kids are little, I'm loving freelancing and kind of the opportunities it gives me. And I really like that I get to do a little bit of everything. I get to do book covers and illustrations and layouts, and I've designed fantasy maps, and I've done maps and signs for the farm park near us. And it's really fun that you never know what the next project's going to be. So for now, I'm definitely enjoying freelancing and all elements of design. But I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I guess I'll have to see how it goes.
Big thank you to Larch Gallagher for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Nick Coleman with Streets Ahead.
Ahead, these streets I tread, I trudge instead. These streets I dread, best left unsaid, misread instead. This human promised land, no fixed homestead. Threads a thread, no loaf-of bread. Brain dead, drugged head, unfed head. Sore head, big head, good times ahead. Look ahead, roof overhead. Red mist, brick red, skinhead, he sees red. Woebegone, redhead, life gone on the riverbed. Frantic crackhead, undead smackhead, stop dead, blood red, heartache widespread. Drip-fed pinhead, inbred figurehead, no-cap plow-ahead, arm steals warheads, code-red bloodshed, spear-fed, home-fed, forlorn aforesaid on these streets ahead. Unread, purebred, like the living dead, shot down on a test bed, no meds, tight feds, a pipe dream made bed, all hope is shed. Clean hospital bed, no more drop dead, the resting place deathbed in a common grave, live bed.
Skateboards and flared jeans go tumbling past me. This platform keeps winding along. We're following dots on the map. Can I sit on your lap while this carriage keeps drumming its song? I'm reading the headlines opposite me. Don't think I'll quite fit. I'll stand till I feel like a drop. Just a muddle of hairstyles and coffee cups covering your face up. Please let me off at the next stop. All of these people on their journey through life, and we don't know where they've been. Some of them are rushing and some take it slow, but we just keep our own speed. La 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 la. All of these people on their journey through life, and we don't know where they've been. Some of them are rushing and some take it slow, but we just keep our own speed.
That was Tube Song by Luna Barge, and before that we had Nick Coleman with Streets Ahead. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Oak Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Thelonious Monk, a compilation CD called Round Midnight. In the 80s, people started calling stuff like Sting or Sade jazz. Anyone in a cool suit with a sax player could be jazz, with sunglasses and a slap bass optional. I've tried converting one of my own songs to make it that kind of Girl from Ipanema wine bar jazz, changing the 1 and 4 chords to major sevenths, the 2, 3 and 6 chords to minor seventh, and the 5th chord to a dominant seventh. Those 90s jazz icons like Lisa Simpson and Bleeding Gums Murphy would never have called it jazz. On the other extreme there is Thelonious Monk, a pianist whose sense of harmony is puzzling even to experts, yet somehow it works. There is plenty of film of him. He stabs at the notes, often quite violently. He wrote Around Midnight, which has become a jazz standard. It is on this CD, which I picked up from a charity shop or bargain bin somewhere. It is often with me in the car, and I seem to play it quite a lot. That may be because I don't expect ever to be totally familiar with it. But also it may be because listening to it takes me on an intellectual journey rather than an emotional one. It is accepted that major chords are happy and minor chords are sad. I find jazz chords are like supercharged minor chords, creating a whole spectrum of melancholy. But I find Monk's music to be quite cheerful. It is music that combines order and chaos in a ratio that appeals to me. It has an element of surprise to it. Monk will establish a nice melody or an interesting riff, or he will play a dazzling flourish. But he will then stab at the keys, creating a jarring dissonance and sounding like he has made a mistake. But then he will repeat it, thus making it clear it is an artistic choice. And that is what interests me. Monk was a product of the bebop era, and in comparison to his contemporaries, his music was considered difficult. But rock music is built on certain dissonances. The challenging double stops that Monk used are not that unusual in a guitar solo. He is certainly no challenge for someone who is familiar with Captain Beefheart. Thelonious Monk, Round Midnight.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Larch Gallagher for being this week's guest. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please don't hesitate to leave a short review on your podcast platform of choice. It all helps. You can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is previous guest Umar Arar with Broken Reality. I'll catch you next week.
more than give back what we've sown.